So to build a boat like this, you need a lot of lumber, and we kind of made our best guess as to how much lumber we would need for the first time when we did the milling. And as we've gotten into the process, we realized that we're going to be a bit shy. So we took some time this winter and did a bunch more logging. Winter's always a little bit of a slow time in any boat shop or boat yard, especially one unheated like this, because we can't paint, we can't use epoxy, we can't put on bedding compound. It needs to be warmer for all that kind of stuff. But this fall, we kind of realized that we had put a pretty big dent in our lumber supply already, and we probably weren't going to have enough to finish the boat. So we wanted to take that time and gather the logs, and we'll do some more sawmilling this spring, and then we should have plenty of lumber. So here is the thick oak that we have left, and this will all become the deadwood. And then behind me we have the pine that we had planed up to finish making the molds. We have some more oak outside and some pine down in the wood yard, but I don't think it's enough to finish the boat. So it was really important this winter to get some logging done and get it milled this spring so that it has some time to dry before we actually need it. And then here, in its winter hibernation mode, we have the rest of the oak that we milled 2 years ago. So it's air dried for 2 years, which should be dry enough for it to use since it's about 2 inches thick. And then by the time we run out of this dried stuff, the other stuff will have had 2 years or so to sit, and it'll be ready for us to use for deck beams and that kind of stuff. So a lot of time our resources are a little limited and we have to do things a bit of the hard way. Moving all the logs last time for sawmilling was that way. We just had the small farm tractor and some big oaks to move. So it was a challenge, but as the progress progresses and more people find out about us and what we're doing, we're starting to get more and more things offered to us, like the use of this here skidder. So last summer this guy just pulled into the driveway and kind of started looking around, and we came out and met him, and he wanted to know what we were doing and was interested in the boat building, and he mentioned that he had a cable skidder and was a retired logger, and should we have a use for it, to let him know. So he gave us a card and we hung on to it, and we realized we needed to do more logging. We called Peter this fall and asked him if we could use the skidder, and he was kind enough to say yes. So we called a town friend who has a trucking company, and we got the skidder moved over here. Peter helped us for a few days moving the logs, and then showed me how to run it, and then left us with his skidder. So we've had it for almost a month now, and we've done a ton of work with it, which has been huge. I mean, I can do more in one day by myself with the skidder than Alex and I could together in a week with the tractor. It's absolutely been amazing. So thank you very much, Peter. You are a lifesaver, and you probably added years to the life expectancy of our backs.
I have arrived. I'm looking for some trees to kill. More, and we'll cut off the while it's up in the air, we'll set the other choker, then cut off your log, and then do it again.
Okay.
With the help of Peter and his skidder, we started moving and stacking some of the closer lumber before heading deeper into the woods to get the rest of the trees.
Tractor would struggle to pull one of these out, never mind all four at the same time. So here we have our giant log pile. Last time we did the milling, we had just the small farm tractor to move the logs, and my buddy's small woodland mills to mill them. And the mill did a great job, and as did the tractor, but they just weren't big enough to handle the really big oaks that we had on the property. So we couldn't really cut any of the really big oaks just because we didn't have a way to move them. We didn't have a way to mill them. So when we realized that we needed to do logging around 2, and we had the access to Peter's skidder, we knew we could move the logs, and we made a new friend, this guy named Steve, who's got a much bigger sawmill. So we had the ability to, one, move the logs and then mill the logs. So we went a little nuts and we cut down some of the much bigger oaks on the property. So we got them all piled up here, and they're up on some cribbing off the ground. So if we don't sawmill for another month, we got to let things thaw out and dry out. The logs are safe and sound. The only thing we need to do is come down on a nice warm day here, if we ever get one again, and paint the ends. Getting a little checked, but nothing too major. And this should give us plenty of lumber. If we can't get the boat built with this, we probably can't build the boat. So the first step in getting all the trees onto the landing and ready for the sawmill is obviously cutting them down.
As we said, the skidder allowed us to take some of the bigger white oaks. We had our eye on this one, which had leaders big enough to use as saw logs, so Steve climbed up into it and took them down independently so they wouldn't get damaged when we felled the massive trunk. We also took this second round of logging as an opportunity to get some interesting and fun shots of trees coming down. We would much rather be working on the boat, but while we're out here we might as well be having fun.
Since Peter was lending us the skidder, we didn't want to have it here for much longer than we needed. So we wanted to make sure that we had everything in place for when the skidder came. So this winter, one of Alex's friends, Dan, came and lent us a hand, and we dropped a whole bunch of trees and got them limbed and ready for the skidder. And then Dan helped me while Alex was working on videos, and we built the cribbing that all of these logs are sitting on. We tried to keep the oaks on the bottom of the pile since they're the heavier ones, and put the pine and the hemlock up top since they're a lot lighter. And you can imagine this log pile is insanely heavy. It probably weighs multiple times more than our ballast keel does. So that cribbing underneath is built out of big logs and is very heavy duty. So it's just some logs that aren't good enough for saw logs, and it'll eventually become firewood. We stacked them up here. And the idea with this is that when we pull the mill up, the logs in the mill will be at a similar height. And until the sawmill arrives, it keeps the logs up and off the ground so they're not all muddy, and it helps them dry and keeps them away from the bugs and the other assorted creepy crawlies. So as soon as the skidder gets here, we're going to start piling the saw logs up on it. Hopefully it's strong enough. And it's great because we got to steam bend all of the frames, probably the end of this summer, beginning of the fall. And since they get steam bent, green lumber is actually better. It dries out really fast after being steamed. So we can use a bunch of this freshly cut oak this fall for steam bending the frames and save that dry oak that we have for things that need to be dry, like the floor timbers or when we start putting on the deck beams. And then by the time we run out of the dry oak that we have, this stuff will have had 1.5 years, 2.5 years to dry, and we can start utilizing it in other aspects of the boat. So I keep talking about oak logs, and there's actually oak and hemlock and spruce and pine in this pile. So let's take a walk through and check out some of these trees and see what we're going to do with them. These 3 logs are from the big spruce that my great-grandfather planted and that we cut down in the front yard earlier this fall. And we were toying with the idea of keeping it whole, but we ended up deciding that it was going to be better to mill it up and glue the mast out of it, since the butt log was really clear, and it's probably enough timber out of that one butt log to get our laminated mast out of. So these 3 will get milled and become the mast and probably the boom for the main setup for the boat. And then the mizzen setup, we're hoping to use Victoria's main and have that trimmed down, and that'll give us the 2 rigs. Alright, so we got almost all the logs loaded up on the landing, and we've decided that instead of keeping the spruce whole for a one-piece mast, we're going to cut it up and glue it up and laminate one out of it. And the reasons for that is we can get rid of a lot of the knots, which will make the mast stronger, and it'll allow us to make a little bit of a hollow section in the middle of the mast, and that way we can run the wires up there for, you know, the navigation and the radio and the electrical and all that kind of stuff, so we don't have to have wires running up our rigging. Which would be really nice, and that's really hard to do with a one-piece mast. So we're gonna commit to here bucking it up and use the skidder to bring it down back and add it to the log pile.
Space on the landing was starting to get a little limited, so we flipped around the first and second log we took down in order for them to fit better.
And up top here, we've got 3 really big hemlock logs, and those came from the large hemlock up in the woods a little ways that was dying from woolly adulgit. And one thing we didn't really think about much when we did the initial round of lumber was lumber just for supports and bracing and staging and all that kind of stuff throughout the build, which so far has chewed up an incredible amount of lumber. So when we got the bigger mill and the skidder, we decided that we should knock down a couple trees that were not going to be used for the boat in any way, shape, or form, but would give us a ton of 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s, 6x6s, all that kind of stuff that we can use for cribbing and for staging throughout the build. So the hemlock was a great candidate for that. There's a ton of timber in that tree. A lot of it's gonna be really knotty, but for those uses, that's totally fine. Yeah, and when we dropped the tree, we strapped the GoPro to the top of it. So we got some pretty wild footage of that. That was fun.
All right, ladies and gents, so we took down just over a half a dozen oak trees and about 5 pine trees. And now we've got 1 more to take down, which will become a lot of our staging for the project once we are working around Arabella's hull. And that's this beautiful guy back here. So we're gonna do something a little bit more exciting this time. Well, looks like I'm almost to my destination. Not much more up here, if you can see. Let's see what we can do with you guys. Here. All right, we're gonna do something slightly exciting right now. I'm gonna put you in a box for a second, and they might be kind of a wild ride. Don't worry, by the time you see this, I'll be out of the tree. Coming down.
How much fun was that? Nothing like strapping a $500 camera to the top of a tree and keeping the fingers crossed. Seems like it made it. God, I hope you're still running that battery didn't die. Here we have the pine that we milled up last time. So this has been drying in the shed here for 2 years now and it's about ready to be used. But we don't need it for a while, so it has even more time to dry, which is great. It's probably not quite enough pine to do everything that we need to do, but now that we have Victoria with her complete mahogany interior and the usable lumber we'll get off of her, this pine should be plenty to see us through to the end of the build. We still cut down a few more pines, and we're going to mill those up just to make sure that we have enough, but we're feeling pretty good on the pine supply right now. We have quite a bit of knotty pine in here, and that's going to get milled up just like the hemlock for 2x4s and 4x4s, just staging, planking, that kind of thing during the build. And then anything of the pine and the oak that's decently clear will just get stickered and stacked and await the day it's dry and we can start using it. Some of you might be wondering how we got these giant logs up on the pile. And that was a fun endeavor, but having the use of the skidder with the winch on the back and the big blade on the front made it, although a little bit of a tricky process, not too bad. Once everything was prepped, the landing was done, the logs were all down and limbed, we had Peter come in with the skidder and got everything dragged into the wood yard here and went through a couple renditions of how to stack it all on the pile with using the skidder and using a cable and a pulley. So, let's start in the aft quarters here. This is chained up. Make sure that we don't get the cables crushed.
Yeah.
They'll just eat themselves.
Yeah.
So make sure that they're spread out, that that's sitting good. You should check that between each twitch.
Of course.
Chain one end up, chain the other end up.
Yep.
The tighter you can have the chain, the more pressure it puts on the chain, but at the same time,
Keep them where they are.
it keeps them where they are. And I can only suck this as far as the pulley.
Yeah.
So if they come out really far,
Yeah.
I can't drag them.
Go all the way through that.
Make sure that this cable runs over
Yep.
and clear, and then I gotta be able to make sure that I can,
see up and over.
well, more so that I have enough skidder cable out that when I pull it in, because like right now I would only be able to pull 6 feet,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be able to get that to go
Yep.
as far.
Using the skidder's winch to pull the logs around and position them on the pile was instrumental to get them all on the landing, and worked incredibly well, especially once we thought to run the wire under the log to help lift them as we pulled. We only had a couple of issues where the cable got stuck or sucked into the pulley. That winch can be a little too strong for this sometimes.
Getting all the logs stacked up in a small area is great. We can work around the wood yard. We can bring the tractor and the wagon and the sawmill in and have room to work and not have logs spread from one end of the wood yard to the other. And as we need them, we can just pop them off the pile and put them on the mill. And we just need the snow to melt and the ground to thaw out and dry up a little bit, and then we can bring the sawmill in and do the milling. But if we try to work in the wood yard too much right now, it's just going to become a big mud pit. So hopefully in May we'll get to doing all the sawmilling. Here we have a bunch of the leftovers from logging. So these are all logs that are not big enough to mill. There are a lot of the branches and the tops from the trees that we did harvest, and there are also some trees that got squished and broken when the other trees fell. So while we had use of the skidder, we piled all this up, and this is going to become probably next year's firewood, as well as all the slash from sawmilling. And then while we had the skidder, we went into the back 40 and collected a whole bunch more. So there's a pile out there that's probably 2, maybe 3 times the size of this. And that should be enough firewood for the next 3 or 4 years for us, which is awesome. So we heat the house with firewood, and it's a really old drafty farmhouse, so we go through quite a bit. And using the little tractor and the wagon, it's always a time-consuming process. We figured while we had the use of the skidder, we might as well go around and make that process less time-consuming. So we piled up enough firewood for, I don't know, I would guess the next 4 years, which should cover the entire time we're here building the boat. So now instead of spending the fall getting the next year's firewood put together, which is several weeks worth of work, we can just come down here with the chainsaw and the log splitter and buck it up, split it, and bring it up to the house for the next year, which is amazing. It's going to save us so much time, which is great. So we're trying to take as much of this downtime this winter as we can to stack the deck as much in our favor. So getting all the logs that we needed so that we're ready for sawmilling. We got a ton of lumber on hand, making sure we got plenty of firewood on hand for the next few years. And this way we can just focus more on boat building this summer, next fall, and subsequent falls. We know that most, if not all of you, are here to see us build Arabella, and trust us when we say that nobody wants us to move fast and get this boat in the water more than we do. But unfortunately, boat building, especially for amateurs like us, is a long, slow process. A lot of it is just going to be things like us cutting down trees and milling lumber and stuff that isn't terribly exciting, but is absolutely necessary to get this boat built, and is all part of this long, windy, crazy journey that we are on. And for Alex and I, that's really the big thing, is sharing the journey. As much as it is sharing that boat build. So if you're really only interested in seeing boat parts get put together, we would say check in every couple months and flip through the videos and see what's going on, and you will definitely find those. This summer will be much, much more concentrated on bolting things together as we get some warmer weather and can really start shaping timbers and painting and applying bedding compound and working with epoxy and doing all that stuff that we just can't do right now because it's just too cold. And the boathouse is way too huge to try to heat. Thanks to everyone who's been watching and following our journey and sending us emails and commenting on YouTube. We really, really appreciate it. We are so psyched to have you all following this journey with us. And we want to let you know about 3 things that are coming up in the not too distant future. One is that we are going to be at the Maine Boatbuilder show in Portland, Maine this weekend. So this video goes live on Friday, and we will be there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if you are in or around Portland, Maine, feel free to stop by the Boatbuilder show. We'll be speaking Sunday afternoon toward the end of the show, but we will be there tabling all weekend, so you can come and find us. The second thing is we are going to be at Jamestown Distributors on April 14th, which is a Saturday down in Rhode Island, and we'll also be tabling and hanging out there. They have a huge tent sale, so if you're in the Rhode Island area, feel free to stop by and meet us. And last, and to us most important, is that we are hosting a open house and a pig roast and a birthday extravaganza on May 5th here at our boatyard. So if you are anywhere near the Western Massachusetts area, or if you would like to travel in, we would love to have you. Last year was the first year we did it. We moved the keel timber in. We had about 100 people show up. We did a big pig roast. We had a lot of other food for those who aren't interested in eating pig. But it was a great time, and it was a great opportunity for us to meet people who are interested in the project and to talk shop and share our journey in person, which is something that we don't often get to do. Usually I'm talking to a camera instead of actually talking to your face. So if y'all are around, we would love to have you. Everyone is welcome, and we hope to see you at one of those 3 events, or maybe some other event in the future. Thanks.
You ready for this?
Y'all ready for this?
No, hold on. Now I'd say that's a pretty good day of vlogging. Pun intended.